investigating a heist, or a series of them. The difference is, as some suggest with the newest entry in the Payday franchise, Payday 3, that the game itself is actually the heist after all. And facts seem to back that statement up, the population of Payday 2 dwarfing that of Payday 3, which only launched back in 2023. Starbreeze Studios, or Overkill Studios underneath them, is in charge of the Payday franchise, an FPS shooter series about teaming up with some other likewise criminals in-game and committing heists of varying tasks and difficulty. Utilizing stealth mechanics and hostage situations, and of course the desire for loot, the gameplay in Payday was simple, but effective, and ensnared many fans of organized crime in the media, such as myself, a big fan of Heat, a movie that Payday seemingly is obviously inspired by. Well, of course, that opening scene of The Dark Knight also applies as well, and probably was the inspiration for the masks. But Payday 3 following its 2023 launch would be rated the worst Payday in the series, and almost immediately abandoned by its fanbase, calling it worse than the previous game both in quality and in content. As of now, only 800 people are playing at peak times, according to Steam charts. And according to that, and the horse's mouth, Starbreeze themselves, Payday 3 not only has not been a success for them, it hasn't even made any profit. With an expensive near $60 million price tag, that's a heavy loss for the company. And these are the reasons that you find Payday 3 in the series, despite its story not totally being finished yet. That's because I don't see the game making a comeback, especially when the major talent has already pivoted off of the game. The Death of a Game series is all about detectives, or the detective, me, who's currently trying standing up vocals right now, so if I sound a little bit, jazzier, that's why, investigating games like this, Dead or Dying, and trying to find the largest contributing factors to such, utilizing a timeline of events that are filled with bits of evidence and hidden clues. Once we finish navigating the game's history, we will combine all of the clues and data for a final deduction, every detective's favorite moment in the sun where we crack the case for good. Stay tuned to the very end of the episode too, because we will be showing a hint on what the next episode in the series, or the next case, will be about. NS is on the case, and detectives, we have a heist to investigate. The story begins right before the acquisition of Overkill Software by Starbreeze Studios, a longtime small Swedish video game developer who made a few off-titles here and there, before growing to a size that they could actually start acquiring other companies, even other Swedish ones, like Overkill Software. Starbreeze Studios might have been smaller fish, but they had big fish dreams and would shift to a technology-oriented company during the 2010s. After the commercial failure of their new project, Syndicate, Starbreeze would have to lay off over 25 employees and lose a large amount of their major talent. But after teaming up with the hit co-op game maker, interesting personality Joseph Fares, they would release Brothers together, which would win numerous awards and receive critical acclaim, helping right their ship, and later turn Joseph's career into an extremely successful one with follow-up titles. This would lead to them starting to push to become a publisher, starting with what would become known as Overkill's The Walking Dead, and followed by two more major projects, Dead by Daylight, a cooperative horror game later on that was met with great success, and of course the topic of this video, just 1 year after Overkill Software's acquisition. Payday 2, the sequel to the first quiet success, and Payday 1, the heist. Now, before the second heist shooter would release, the CEO for Starbreeze, Bo Anderson, who was the founder of Overkill Studios, would allegedly commit a heist of his own, selling his shares worth about $2 million USD right before their collapse on the market. Anderson was reportedly pressed by his bank to sell his shares, and although he was investigated, including with the Starbreeze headquarters also being raided, being even taken into custody, Anderson would actually later be cleared of any of the charges. Now that's good, authentic gameplay. And this would, of course, be good for him and other money-hungry dorks, I'm sure. But for Starbreeze, they were now in a dire financial strait and would start asking for extensions to keep operating for the next year and look at selling properties to keep afloat. Fortune would change for the Swedish company in 2013, following the release of Payday 2, the heist simulator that seemed to not just take inspiration from the first game, but actually evolve it. That game would sell an impressive 55 million copies total, becoming a mainstay on Steam, where it still remains as one 12 years later, and smashing their initial first game success, which still reached an impressive 14 million players to be fair. Payday's gameplay was simple. You teamed up with other criminals in the game and picked between a selection of heists and different objectives and weapons to utilize, and of course rewards to gain, at varying levels of difficulty. You then had to complete the heist by avoiding detection, fighting the cops or the SWAT with your own arsenal of weapons. And the winner is the player who leaves with the money. For players like me who loved noir and crime dramas, Payday 2 was the chance for us to take those dreams and wishes and bring them to life. You would don your mask and work to become the richest and most successful internet video game criminal that you could be. Payday 2 would continue on for years, releasing new heists, new masks, and new fun for the player base. Sure, the company behind Payday was kind of weird, but hey, they were Swedish, so apparently that's on brand. But although Overkill wasn't ever a beloved company, during its Payday 2 reign, the game was greatly loved and enjoyed, and became a crucial part of Steam's cooperative ecosystem, on top of just being really financially successful, of course. This, alongside Overkill's massive The Walking Dead failure, a game that we actually already covered on this series, would lead to the desire to create another sequel for their most successful series yet. Payday 3 would be announced to be in development May 30th, 2016. Alongside the announcement would come details concerning how the game was to be structured, which was apparently being billed as a microtransaction-less title, whatever that meant. Starbreeze, who was in charge of the game's development now, would also purchase the rights for Payday for a whopping $30 million from Italian publisher and developer 505 Games, who helped them publish the second game. But they weren't saying goodbye to 505, in fact they were probably saying, "I'm going back to 505. It's a 7 now, flat." Anyway, 505 was promised a 33% revenue share of the next Payday game, being capped at $40 million in total, something we will circle back for later. 505 Games would later go on to purchase all assets from Starbreeze, from checks notes, wait, Smilegate? What the I just covered them in the Lost Ark. Following the acquisition, they would now own like 30% of the game's share capital, and would likely have the chance to grab some more of the game's future success, since they helped them reach that level, which was probably nice. But despite all of this hype and money being thrown around for the rights and procurement of a sequel, Payday 3 would actually go quiet for nearly like 5 years, where suddenly it was reannounced on March 19th, 2021, as to be coming 2 years later in 2023. But according to devs, who said this after the fact, its actual dev cycle was only 4, however. Taking their time to perfect the new Payday was going to be a requirement. Remember, Payday 2 was a smash hit, and the expectations were going to be that the game was as good or better, with that, at the very least. That's kind of typical with the full sequel. They first had to make sure the game was fully funded, which they would achieve after striking a deal with Koch Media for nearly $60 million USD. Koch would later on become PlayOn, a publisher and distributor under the parent company, Embracer Group. It gets really complicated, sorry, but that's why we're detectives. Embracer Group, who would acquire as many as like 15 plus developers during 2020, would also acquire Starbreeze the money they needed through issuing new shares and for the rights of their new game and series. Yeah, that means that they would actually give away the rights that they just paid a boatload for, but probably now, due to financial reasons, had little choice but to finesse the right type of budget they needed to keep afloat as a company and keep Payday 3 chugging on. Meanwhile, Payday 2 was still cooking, and would drop their last heist that same year, in the summer of 2023. Crude Awakening would bring the total heist number up to like a whopping, the number can be kind of inflated because some of them are just like storefronts, so you could say like 80, 90, but I would say more realistically like 60 plus, with at least 30 full ones in total. Payday 2 would launch with 12, which was up from the 6 that launched with Payday 1. Comments were circulating early about expectations for the sequel though, and they were heavy ones, understandably given the game's success. Players were expecting to see at least like 12 heists launching with Payday 3, if not more due to the expectations that were being pushed up with each title. If Payday 3 would launch in a worse state than its previous titles, it would be a catastrophic event for the series, as it would immediately hurt both the game's reception and impressions early, which would have a long-lasting effect on the online game. Because remember, Payday 2 might have had issues at launch, but it had enough content. The reason Payday 3 was doubly in trouble due to this was the game was actually online only, meaning that if it didn't find that early success, which is why I'm talking about it now, which clearly was expected, the game would shut down fully, with no other way to access it. If Payday 3 wouldn't sell dozens of millions of copies and find success, with Overkill and Starbreeze's financial woes, there was little chance they would hitch their ride to that ticket past a point. Payday 3, 7 years after it reportedly entered development, would launch globally on all major platforms September 21st, 2023, and what came next felt like another heist DLC. As you can hear someone like speeding through the background committing a heist. The only problem was the heist was like taking your money for launching an unfinished game, and a buggy one, because that's what Payday 3 was. It would launch with only 8 heists. Worse, of these 8 heists, many would actually share the same objectives, such as grabbing keycards, QR codes, and even hacking the Wi-Fi? What the? Sounds like my teenage years all over again. But less content overall to enjoy, and boring heist objectives, and a slew of other issues would sour the reception of Payday 3 so much that it would score a dreadful 43% out of 100 on Steam from 30,000 reviews, and a 66 out of 100 from 44 different critics on aggregate review website Metacritic. Let's tackle some of these critical reviews, and to be clear, I'm allowing you to be critical of my voice right now because I'm like sick, so go ahead and get that off in the comments. But before we dive back into the gameplay ourselves, let's talk about the critical reviews. Starting with the most positive major critical review, which is embarrassing to me. It was an 8 out of 10 from Game Informer, who I actually like, who would state that although the game had rough edges, the heists were challenging and entertaining, and while they would complain about the immense grind needed for certain weapons, they would, in the following statement, dismiss this criticism, and most criticism, stating that Payday 3 was still worth playing. If only they didn't also mention that it only qualifies if the server issues were fixed, or at least made that more of a point, which had been plaguing the game since it launched, making it unplayable for some players entirely at launch. That, alongside not mentioning the value offering with the game priced at a whopping $40, tells me that you can discard this review pretty safely, like most critical reviews that don't talk about price and value offerings. Something IGN also suffered from in their review was that they rated the game a 7 out of 10, which is the same rating that they gave Starfield, which is just confusing, but they state that the game would be playable and enjoyable in a year or two. The only problem is the game was launching and requiring $40 right now. But they were right about a few things, such as the greater ability to use stealth in Payday 3 to complete heists, and how the combat was improved slightly, though they kind of went about it the wrong way. Many critics would talk about the game being faster than the previous game. It's not, but the combat was probably better overall. Telling people, though, to put their faith into a fully launched game that wasn't ready yet and to wait years to get their value offering back was just irresponsible, though, from these media gaming companies. I was surprised to see so many media critics doing it as well. PC Gamer would rate the game a 67 out of 100, stating that it could be so much more, which was fair, but was held back by grindy progression systems and always being online. This felt like the most fair review of the game for me personally, especially after having played it, but I will explain more in detail why Payday 3 felt like a worse game than its previous game, with the help of a community member, Unintelligible, on YouTube. As broken down in their video, many gameplay aspects were actually worse in Payday 3, which might surprise you, especially concerning the game's AI now. Now snipers were nearly useless, where you went from having like a 2-second response time, god, that gives me PTSD from Jedi Outcast, to like 6 to 8 seconds of response time. Basically making the snipers useless, because that's way too much time to just react to, which were a big part of the outside combat in Payday, because you have to balance the combat, otherwise people don't have a reason to do it stealthily. But that's not even where it ends. We have even more classic units being borked up as well, like the taser unit or the zapper. The taser guy was just about kind of like disabling you in the previous game. It had a very simple but cool role. The taser guy in this Payday was more about spending time looking for his taser, as apparently he would hide it in a never-ending bag and would spawn alone oftentimes, and still does, and easily just be killed because he needs a support team. The cloaker has been turned into a zombie who flies around like the hunter from Left 4 Dead for some reason, and the bulldozer units, which are like the big giant juggernaut tanks, drop powerful weapons that you can use and cycle to just keep killing them endlessly, trivializing the entire combat of the map. There's so much more, like the shielder now being able to be shot through the the visor of the shield. Why did it feel like Payday 3 just wasn't less content, it was less of a game, mechanically? Well, from scouring the web as detectives do in their underpants, cough, you can find that the majority of the core team who worked on Payday 2 didn't work on the second game. In fact, the overwhelming majority of them, including the lead game director, the lead level designer, and even a founder of the company, and major game designer on both Paydays, Ulf Anderson, was gone from the sequel. Instead, now they had a principal game designer behind the biggest failed Battlefield leading development. The game industry is nuts. It's one of the few places, especially in tech, where you can literally just fail and then get promoted. And I'm just saying, guys, if you think I'm just throwing shots, look at a lot of the recent failures that we've covered in the series and check out who's leading the failures. Oftentimes, developers who've already done it before, who've already had massive failures. I'm not saying you don't give people more chances, but I'm saying upgrading their position seems a bit tenuous. The turmoil behind the scenes has seemingly hamstruck Payday 3, though, from the start, as it seemed to lack the same direction as the previous game and was just worse from a gameplay perspective and anything not the feel of the combat. Days after the game's launch, server issues would keep people from playing the game, or put them in an endless search cycle and matchmaking to no avail. And Payday 3 was still preventing the majority of players from even playing it. Still across platforms, Payday 3 was able to still reach an impressive 1.3 million players a few days after launch, but according to Steam charts just a month later, and that 69,000 player peak count would drop over half to just 28,000 players peak. A far cry from the previous numbers and a far cry from expectations placed on them sales-wise. Remember, the first game sold 15 million, and the second game sold like 50 million. I mean, compared to Payday 2 on Steam, that's not good at all. The numbers that I just mentioned before aren't good. when that game was able to quadruple and then some Payday 3's numbers. In fact, during the same month that it launched. The producers would take the field and remind us they actually have a job and tasks to complete, like an Among Us level imposter, stating that they were aware of the ongoing server issues and that they hadn't confirmed an offline mode yet. They were considering it. Cool. Considered. And fast forwarding 2 years in the future, it's still online only and in an even worse state, so I guess still being considered. Almir Listo would claim that everything was going according to plan until the servers went down, which just wasn't remotely true. People weren't enjoying the new game, server issues aside, due to the other issues that I have already covered. By the end of October, Payday 3 had 10 times lower player counts than Payday 2, and fans were awaiting the first patch eagerly, hoping that it could at least make the game serviceable and playable. Payday 2, always going on to maintain an audience even if Payday 3 was a smash because of how much DLC was in the game, how much time people invested into their accounts, was kind of always gonna happen. And, well, because it was just more fun of a game, as we would find out now after the sequel would launch. Just a month or two after launch, speaking of which, and Payday 3 was already faltering. Even Overkill and Starbreeze's bosses weren't happy, stating outright that Payday 3 had underperformed. And directly after this, the game would drop from $40 to $30 in price. Payday 3 is a strange story, because as the timeline unfolds, you realize how things were so screwed from the beginning, especially since it took them nearly 2 months to come out with a serious patch that fixes tons of bugs with server issues, and introduces the infamy system, alongside 2 more classic heists to bolster the small roster. But what were they waiting on? Did they not have like a launch plan besides if things didn't go according to plan? You know, because plans need more than one plan? Payday 3 felt like a lesson in consumer relations, and how to totally burn out your massive audience before the game even turned a couple months old. Starbreeze would admit a few months later that Payday 3 was performing significantly lower than they had hoped, but were still focused on its long-term success. The problem is, like shown with the Overkill's The Walking Dead, they will abandon a game if it doesn't make sense, the 2 meanings, for them. Sure, Payday is their king franchise, but it's not like with their pre-existing financial issues they can just afford to keep putting all of their eggs in one basket. If Payday 3 doesn't make them any money, they aren't going to keep investing in it past a point. And while that might sound like an exaggerative claim, Starbreeze would actually come out and admit on livestream that Payday 3 hadn't even made any profits.
So far, the game hasn't made any profits, so we haven't paid anything to them.
A devastating admittance. Chapter 1 and 2 were released as DLCs for Payday 3, which would both run for about $10, and only add a single heist each. This means that the game was only at 10 heists, 2 of which you had to pay for. Sure, that was kind of the approach of Payday, right? It's almost like a joke. It's like Payday is like the game that you gotta keep paying for, you know? It's in the name. With the second game having dozens and dozens of paid DLC. But Payday 3 was promised with no microtransactions. Is the argument that the DLC in this game are macrotransactions because they're $10, they don't count? And why not release your first 2 chapters of content for free, especially knowing how much you flubbed everything up? It shows how unwilling you are to waver from the business plan, or at least how unable Overkill was as the developer. But hey, at least you could buy that 1-year pass for the DLC, for the price, for the same price as the game? Meanwhile, the game still felt cobbled together and they wanted you to pay $60 for it? Shout out to my city, but Chapter 3 would introduce the Houston Breakout DLC, showcasing how terribly dangerous my city is. Just kidding, but it's also true. But the new DLC would drop August 19th, 2024. And the good thing about this DLC was it was rated the first successful DLC the game had received. The population would actually rebound up to 4,600 players. The newfound success wasn't great enough though, as the previous game director, I think you say this person's name like Miodrag Kovacevic, would be reportedly stepping away from their role, and Andreas Pinninger and Almir Listo, the producer duo, would be put in charge of the creative of it. Something historically I've never really seen work, because producers are glorified marketers in my opinion, and their actual game knowledge is incredibly low, like more executive type positions. Going into year 2, promises were made to keep the game going though, and making it more enjoyable by the day. Chapter 4, Fear and Greed, would drop September 16th, 2024, and although it wasn't a bad DLC, it was remarked to be a step down from the Houston heist, being a far more forgettable heist. Fear and Greed is about stealing stocks. Yeah, you heard that right. Sorry, but I don't know about you guys, my favorite scene in Heat, or Ocean's 11, wasn't when they raided someone's stock portfolio. Sorry. Games are supposed to take ideas and make them even crazier than movies can, and fun, and let you participate in it. And instead, we had a game that didn't have any imagination. The first World Bank update, in my opinion, is like the best update in the game. That's because it's free, and not a paid DLC, and would drop December 10th, 2024, with a newly realized heist and 15 more weapon and mask patterns. It was like they finally realized they needed to trade goodwill, aka money, to keep their game alive. But Starbreeze can't be faulted for not trying to make moves, well, outside of their game updates apparently, and they would apparently reclaim the publishing rights for Payday 3, which would likely free up, potentially, some of the requirements being placed on them, or potentially limiting them from improving the game. But considering the update that dropped the same month would be another paid DLC alongside Update 2.1.2, it seemed like the lessons weren't really being learned. You can even see it in the comments section, with statements reading, "You can't fix your game while you keep asking us to pay for it." An update that might have introduced a new heist and upgraded the armor system, but is led with a note at the top that reads, "It's filled with a bug that reverts your mask of choice." It's just a clown fiesta, and not in the good mask kind of way. You have another paid heist, this one rated worse than the previous ones, and apparently no awareness from overkill. The next heist released was another paid DLC, the Delivery Charge Heist, which dropped September 10th, 2025, and was better than Party Powder, but not by much. There were reused voice lines, and the feel of the heist was more of like a horde mode than a heist map. The heists that were dropping weren't even bad, but they were just kind of lukewarm, and not the upgrade people expected from a sequel. And people were just expecting a lot more of them. This felt like a team that had worse funding, was worse organized, and even had less manpower, which didn't seem like that was the case before all of this started. And it's pretty hard to turn a game, at least especially in this case a failed game, into a success without flipping that formula. The music is playing, detectives, which means the timeline has come to an end and my voice can soon take a rest. Thank you, everybody. As the end of 2025, Payday 3 is in no better of a state than before, and not only has a worse population, with under 1,000 peak players, it still is massively dwarfed by its predecessor. Simply put, Payday 2 was the better game, and better payday for both us as fans and them as developers raking in the dough from it. And now, with so much of the original talent gone and trust in the vision, Payday doesn't look like it will be making a comeback anytime soon. And since it's an always online game, that means it has a real chance to literally die in the near future too. And so, why? Why did Payday 3, despite having the biggest budget and the most support from the Paydays, reportedly not even scratch a tenth of the success of the previous game, or even beat the first game's success? Well, if you missed any of the clues along the way, it was released as a sequel, pretty much only in name. Greatly reduced content scope and enjoyment. Financial turmoil plagued the parent company. Lack of original talent. Lackluster value offering. A worse performing game technically and commercially. The dust settles and the heist has taken place, but were the players in on the heist this time? Or were the developers or publishers pulling this ultimate heist? I'll let your thoughts guide you on that path, but one thing is for certain. Payday 3 is in the shadow of its predecessor, and I don't think it will be leaving that shadow anytime ever. The sad part is that the solution isn't an easy one at all. They can't just pivot to a new game, Payday 4, yeah, because it just ruins whatever goodwill they have left. And they can't go all in on their 12-year-old game, Payday 2, because it doesn't have the same engine and it's not modern at all. You might say this is them having to lay in the bed that they made, but I guess my personal bias comes from, as it does at times, and I'm sad, that I just want to see more heist-based games, and crime thrillers being more popular amongst gaming. I just love the niche genre and find it so much fun to make a great score with my friends. Payday faltering is a big blow, I won't deny. But, not gonna lie, I don't feel too bad because I still hold out hope that more heist games are to come, including the upcoming new GTA game, which has obviously been a heist-style game since probably the third one. The next GTA will very much serve as a home ground for many of us video game criminals. Now, until the next heist, or the next case, detectives.
The journey was long, and ash from the volcano burned our lungs. Our fathers told stories of the beast that ruled the barren wastes of Arandas.